I'm going to go ahead and kick this off so that you can get on with your day. It probably won't be a full hour, but there is time that I've blocked off if you want to ask specific questions as when I finish. I'm just going to kind of go over a few slides here just to talk about the topic at hand. So that's how to make your website content look more engaging, how to make it easier to scan and read and not scare people away. Can you see my screen? Can you see my slide? Yep, perfect. Okay. So just a quick little thing about me and who I am. So I own an agency called Design TLC, which has been in existence for over 10 years, and we've worked with WordPress all that time. Before that, I had a stationery business. So I have a design background, but I also was in marketing. So then I stayed home with my two kids and started my own business and started making websites around 2009, 2010. I've got really involved in the WordPress community and built a lot of different kinds of websites over the years. But a few years ago, I decided that I really loved working with the education community, with nonprofits, and with small independent schools. So that's all we do now. And that allows us to kind of really get to know the industry and do a great job with the sites that we build. And I love working with the types of content that shows kids, happy kids, and who doesn't love working with that? My kids are now grown and gone. They live far away from me. I'm in Washington, D.C., and my daughter's in Chicago, and my son's in Los Angeles. So I don't get to see them that often. That's another reason I like working with all these cute kids in school. It reminds me of my days as mom when they were little. And I like to run and ride my bike, and I'm super into productivity. And Heather, who's worked for me, and Lauren, who works with me, can tell you that I'm uber organized. So let's talk about content on your website. And I want to just start by saying that oftentimes when clients come to us to have their website built, they say we have too much content. We want to get rid of our content. It's too much. We want to get rid of pages. We want to get rid of content. And that may be true in a large part, but there also is a lot of value in having content because there are people who like to read it. So it's a matter of just not making it overwhelming. It's a matter of organizing it. And the more content you have on your site, actually, the better it is for Google too, because Google can then get more information about what your school is about. So be careful about cutting too much. So the first rule of content design is how you present your content on your page. And that includes things like your line length, how much space is around your white space is around your text, but also there's a general rule of thumb that you should have 40 to 80 characters as a line length. If it's too long, your eye has to go too far back and forth if you think about that. This is especially true in print. In web design, it's more debatable, but especially when you think about on a phone, it's going to be smaller, but on a large screen like I have, if it goes that whole width, I'm going to have to turn my head to actually read it. So you just want to pay attention to not having your text go from end to end on your page. That will automatically make it less overwhelming. Also, having enough space between your lines so they're not crammed together. That's called your line height. And then your font size. Don't make your text too large or too small. About 18 to 26 pixels is the size that you should be aiming for. We normally make our body text 18, sometimes 20, depending on the font. Some fonts look different at different sizes. Your line spacing, that space between your lines, should be 1.5% of your height of your font. And then this is also really important, and I talked about this in another recent Lunch and Learn, and that is not to center all of your text. When you center body text and when you center long lines of text, it not only doesn't look very good, but it can also be harder to read because, again, your eye has to bounce around. It's not coming back to the same point. And sometimes you have one word dangling at the bottom in the center that's called an orphan. So you want to, when you have paragraph text left, justify it. If you have a lot of lines of headline text, even left, justify it. If you've got just a couple of lines, centering is fine. So those are some very basic design principles that you can apply to your content that will off the bat make it easier to read and make it easier to scan. The other thing that you can do is break up your text a bit with subheads and bullet points and bold. And you may do some of this already, but make it scannable so that someone who isn't going to sit and read the whole thing is going to be able to see what it's about with some words that jump out at them. And I want to make a note of the heading, the HTML code that's used for headings. If you're editing in your website and you're seeing the option to code or to style different pieces of text with H1, H2, H3, H4, have you all seen that? Or heading 1, heading 2, heading 3, heading 4. Most people think that that is a design style. And in some ways it is, because in your style sheet for your website, there is code applied for a general H1 tag, H2, H3 that might say what size it is, or if it's bold or what color. But you can override that and you could make an H1 very small and an H3 very large. It's really not about the size. The H1, H2, H3, those are heading code markup that's for Google. That tells Google how important content is on your page. You only want to have one H1. That should be the title of your page. That tells Google what the page is called and what it's about. And then after that, you'd have an H2, a heading 2, which would be a subtitle, one of your main subtitles. You can have multiple H2s, and then underneath that would be H3. And again, oftentimes that will also impact the design, because your H3 is probably smaller than your H2. But it doesn't always have to be that way. If your H3 isn't the most important point on your page, but you want it to really be big and pop out, you can style that H3 by itself however you want to. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Here's an example of body text that we just worked on a site where the client gave us some text and it was bolded. That's what you're seeing on the left. And then on the right, we broke it up. We did a little bit of editing to it. You'll see it doesn't match exactly, but we pulled out some important sentences and made them H2, H3. We made some bullets. And so you can see off the bat, it's much more scannable. It's much easier to read, even though it is a lot of text. All right, let's get into the really fun stuff. We like to use accordions for schools, and it's often you'll see it on the FAQ page, for example. But sometimes you have some content that could be overwhelming and that could cause someone to have to scroll a lot to get down to the content that they're really interested in. And so what accordions do is they allow you to display more content without adding the need to scroll a lot. So if you want to shrink the length of a page, you can use an accordion on your site. Do any of you use accordions on your website? You can put in the chat if you use an accordion or know what one is. There are several plugins for WordPress that will do this. I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but here's an example of what it looks like. So here we're breaking up the different areas of academic content into this so you can break it up. Maybe you really want to know about math or social studies. And if you have to know about social studies, if you want to learn about that and you don't have an accordion, you might not even get to that point. You might give up on the page. So accordions can really help engage people and draw them into the content of your website without having to scroll a lot. They will have to click, and it also works very well on a mobile. Let's see what tabs look like. Tabs are very similar to accordions in that they roll up content for you so that your user doesn't have to scroll as much. You can do it as a horizontal, like I'm showing in this example, where you click on these tabs and the different content shows below it. Sometimes it can look just like buttons and you won't even really know that it is tabs. It almost looks like you're changing to another page within the page. Or you can even line up your tabs vertically like this. And when you click on it, then the content to the right changes. So it can be a very user-friendly, elegant way to present this content, again, in a way that's not overwhelming and that allows people to kind of drive their own car here. They can control what they want to read about. Text animation and other types of animation can be really fun. It needs to be used sparingly and it needs to be used appropriately. If I leave this up here for a long time, your eyes are going to start to bug out, right? It's going to be too much. So you want to make sure that you're not animating everything on your page and that you're not using it willy-nilly just to be cool, but that you're using it in a way that's going to be impactful. Here's an example of animation on a site where on the scroll, we're rolling in some content so that it draws attention to it. Here's another example where they had a bunch of words describing their school, and instead of making a list, we're having them sort of fade in and out. So it draws some attention, but it's not too overwhelming and it's not all over the page. Okay, so how do you do all these cool, fun things? Well, is everybody here using WordPress?
Yes.
Okay, so I mean, we're doing a WordPress Lunch and Learn, but I'm sure that whatever platform you're on, you can find ways to do this within those platforms. With WordPress, you can use plugins, and there are several plugins that will work for the accordions, the tabs, and the animation. Shortcodes Ultimate is a free plugin. It also has a premium add-on that you can purchase, and that has built into the free version the opportunity to use accordions, to do tabs. And then there's another plugin called Animate It, which allows you to animate your text. The other animation that you can do is actually in code. So does anybody here know CSS code at all or know how to do CSS code? So if you or someone that you work with knows how to edit CSS code, it's in the customizer of your theme. You can actually just paste it in there. There are some code snippets that you can get that will actually let you easily animate some text or animate a box or something like that. So you can actually do that with code as well. We use a page builder on our site. We use either Beaver Builder or Elementor. There's another one called Divi, which you may use on your website. And there's another one I haven't used, which is SeedProd. These all have accordions and tabs and other kinds of fancy techniques built into them. We use Beaver Builder because it allows us to quickly customize different pages and different sections of pages of websites for schools. And it also allows them to really easily on the front end edit their own content without having to know any code. We customize the code within it, but we don't have to make a theme from scratch. And so it makes our websites more affordable and really easy to use. What it also does is it means we don't have to add in the Shortcodes Ultimate and any of those others because this already has a bunch of stuff built in. So not only does it do accordions and tabs and animations, there's a lot of other things it has, pricing tables and all kinds of cool like headline options and I'm trying to think of other things, charts, and just like the sky's the limit pretty much. So we use a page builder that has all of that built into it. It allows us to really go in and design the text like I'm talking about doing. Does anybody else here use a page builder? Okay, and Matt, I see your question. So I know you use Beaver Builder, and they do have some text animation add-ons that you can purchase, some premium add-ons that have some fancy text options. But it also is really easy to use the code with Beaver Builder as well, some animation code. Oops. That's all I have in terms of how to make your content look fancy. But the really most important thing is that you don't want to overdo any of these kind of fancier techniques. Again, people can have reactions when there's too much going on. And I have a lot of slides that can sort of demonstrate that. If I leave this up here for a while, it would become super annoying. So you want to make sure that you use these things where they're applicable and really think about using them judiciously and not overusing them on your site, using them where they're going to make an impact. The first things that I talked about, though, breaking up your text, paying attention to your line length and your line height, not centering all your text, those are things that you should be doing with all of your content, whether you're doing something fancy or not. So does anybody have any questions? Yes, Matt.
I'm wondering, when you're evaluating changes you're making, like, do you use Google Analytics to say, okay, well, people were bouncing on this page, we changed to accordion.
Mm-hmm.
Is there a way to say working or not working, or like, how do you know when you should change? Like maybe there's good content and that's like doing just fine, and it's kind of big and chunky. Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what's the,
Yeah, that's an excellent
I think
question.
what I'm looking for too is there a benchmark? Like, is there a standard that you're trying to reach for?
That's an excellent question. Yeah, bounce rate is something that you sure can look at in your Google Analytics for a page. If you go and change this and see what happens, you can use the bounce rate. That would be a very good measurement because you'll see if people start to leave it less often. So that's a great question. I think there's also just a general non-measurable look and feel that you can get feedback from. So, asking a few people to take a look at it. I've mentioned also before some user testing. There are some free user testing tools that you can use. I can send that out in the follow-up email, link to that as well. And that goes beyond some of the techniques that we've talked about, but it can help just with your general messaging, making sure that people are able to find what they need to find in terms of their user experience with your navigation and that type of thing. So it's not really a measurable thing in that sense, but it is something you can get some feedback. You can get some feedback on. So, I think the research that's out there on text and line length and all that type of thing does show people who have measured that in general. It might not be specific to your website, but in terms of general design principles, the things that I'm sharing have been researched and shown to be easier to read and a better user experience.
Right.
Good question. Anybody else have a question or a comment or anything that you're wondering about WordPress, anything you're trying to troubleshoot, any malware on your site, any other issues, speed issues, your site's running really slowly?
I have a question about testing. When
Yeah.
we start to send our new site out for administrators, maybe some faculty, some parents to review, do you have any good tools for what sort of feedback, like a form?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there is a plugin that we use. I believe there's a free version of it, but you might have to pay for it. I think it might be $99 for a year. It's called Project Huddle. And there's another one called, I believe it's called User Back, but I will find that out and put it in my follow-up email to you. And what those do is it's a plugin that you add to your site, and it creates a commenting box on the front end of the site that allows you to comment on different sections. Heather has used it on her site, so she can, if you have any questions about how it is from the user end, but it then collects all of that information so that you can address it.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, I found it to be really user friendly. I mean, even if you have people commenting who aren't, big into technology, it's pretty easy for them to figure out and use, I think.
Yeah.
Great.
And then they can be specific, and they don't have to go in a Google Doc and say on this page, and they put the wrong link in, or they don't put the right link, and you're not exactly sure where they're talking about. You can identify it specifically that way.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. If you have somebody who is going to make 100 comments, though, it might get a little overwhelming for you. So you might want to be specific on what kind of comments you're looking for. I wouldn't recommend it for somebody if they want to rewrite a page of copy. That's not what you want to use it for. That would be something more in an email or a document.
Right.
Okay. Anything else? Any other WordPress questions? All right. Well, I thank you for joining me today very much. It's good to see you. And I hope this was helpful. I will send out the video and the slides and a couple of the links that we talked about later today or tomorrow.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you, Tara.
Bye-bye.
Bye.